today is November the 22nd.
And nobody said a damn thing about it in the media I saw today.
Oh, of course not. They just soon forget about that. That's one of the biggest downfalls and failures of the media in the history of American media. If today the polls show that 85 to 90% of the public now understands that there was a conspiracy to kill President John F. Kennedy. And by the way, that is supported by the federal government of the United States, because the last official investigation was the House Select Committee on Assassination, and they concluded that there was at least 2 gunmen shooting at Kennedy, and therefore is probably a conspiracy. But we don't know who the other guy was, and he probably missed, so it was still Oswald.
That's right.
Shots from the School Book Depository.
Absolutely. Probably missed.
It's just nuts. It's really nuts.
It is nuts. I mean, facts, all littering the JFK investigation countryside that no one, look, they walk through these huge fields piled high with facts and they pretend like they're not there.
Right. Well, if you'll listen carefully, Gerald R. Ford, our unelected president, served on the Warren Commission to investigate the death of President Kennedy. And throughout his lifetime, his standard comment was, we could find no evidence of conspiracy. Now, notice he didn't say there was no conspiracy. Right. He just said we could find no evidence of conspiracy. And that's true enough, because they never looked for it. In fact, they turned away anybody. For example, Bill Newman and his wife, Gail, and their 2 small children were standing there less than 10 feet, probably the closest witnesses to President Kennedy when the fatal shots were fired at his head. And 10 feet. And they were never called to testify to the Warren Commission. Now, I wonder why. Well, I can tell you why. Because less than an hour later, he was on Channel 8 television in Dallas-Fort Worth saying that he and his wife threw themselves down on their children to protect them because, in his own words, the shots were coming from up behind them on what you call that knoll. Yeah.
And then he never made another comment after that, probably.
Oh, he did. No, he talked to me all through the years. He'll still talk to you. In fact, he talked to Jesse Ventura. He was on Jesse Ventura's show Friday night. So
that was one they just had to ignore.
He will talk to anybody that wants to talk to him, but they ignored him. They didn't talk to him. None of the official investigations bothered to talk to him. Jim Garrison had him and Gail come to New Orleans, where they got hit in a taxi cab and almost got in a serious collision there. It's unfortunate. Those things just kind of seem to happen to people who actually saw what happened to Kennedy.
Yeah.
The whole thing, oh, well, when China can slip a submarine up to within 30 miles of our shore and launch a large missile, and the Pentagon tells us it was a contrail, I guess they think that we'll just believe anything.
Kind of tells the story. By the way, if you can go to the issue of Lyndon Baines Johnson's mistress, one of them anyway, who said that he told her the night before, he said, as of tomorrow, that SOB will never humiliate me again.
Yep.
So that's what she said.
That's what she told me, he said.
Yep. And if you can go to Jim Marrs in the guests box at Rense.com, look under his name there where it says the wink. All right? I want all of you to pull that up. That is the most revealing wink of the 20th century.
Well, and that wink, you would have to see the actual news footage, because mostly you just see still photographs.
Yeah.
But that was a famous picture of Lady Bird and Lyndon Johnson and Jackie Kennedy standing in Air Force One following the assassination, just before when he was about to be sworn in as president, which is a whole issue right there. Here Johnson was telling anyone who would listen in Parkland Hospital that, this could be the start of a communist plot, and an attack. And so what does he do? He rushes out of Parkland Hospital, runs back, gets on Air Force One, leaving behind the military officer with the nuclear launch codes, codenamed football. So, wait a minute. Obviously, he knew better that there was no communist attack, or he would have kept the man carrying the football,
right.
The launch codes, close at hand. And then he gets to Air Force One, and instead of rushing out of Dallas and taking off immediately for Washington, he sits there on the tarmac for a long time waiting on federal judge Sarah Hughes to show up to administer the oath of office, which he said Robert Kennedy told him to take before leaving Dallas, and Robert Kennedy later denied that, saying he never told him any such thing. And, of course, according to the Constitution, if the president is killed or incapacitated, then by the normal chain of command, the vice president takes over. So there was really no reason whatsoever for him to take the oath of office, except as a public display that the power had changed and he was now the new president. But it even gets better. When Sarah T. Hughes arrived on Air Force One, she said, "Mr. President," referring to Johnson, "I'm really sorry, but I could not find a copy of the swearing-in ceremony." And according to a deputy sheriff who was there and later told me, he said Johnson looked around at the people gathered there and said, "If any of you say anything about this, I'll call you a liar." And he reached in his pocket and pulled out a copy of the swearing-in ceremony.
You're kidding.
That I hadn't heard. How do you like that one?
That's damn near as good as the wink.
Right. Now back to the wink. So while they're standing there and Sarah T. Hughes is preparing to give the oath of office, he turns and looks back at Texas Representative Albert Thomas, and Thomas gives him a wink, and we don't know if Johnson responded, but he probably did.
Look at Johnson's jowls. He's smiling. Look at the side of his face, folks, and then look at the picture of him when he's taking the top picture. His cheeks are pulled up and a smile at his mouth corners. No question.
Well, it was the crowning moment of his political career.
That's right.
The thing he had worked for his entire life. That's why when Kennedy, as kind of a political gesture, after receiving the Democratic nomination for president in 1960, offered the vice presidency to Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson, much to the shock and amazement of not only the Kennedy people, but his own people, accepted it. And later, he explained, "Well, it put me one step closer to the president."
It doesn't get any closer than that. All right. We'll be back with Jim in just a couple minutes. We'll talk about Jackie in lieu of her ability to carry on much in public life, what she chose to do, and how they eventually killed her. And I do believe she was killed, but that remains conjecture. We'll talk about that and more with Jim in a minute. Okay, back with Jim Marrs. Jackie Kennedy eventually, as you know, married Onassis. That was a weird thing. Onassis goes way back to the 50s, though, in his meddling in things American. He's according to the Gemstone file. I don't know if you pay much attention to that or not, Jim, but Onassis just didn't appear out of nowhere. He was involved with a lot of stuff.
That's true, and I don't think it was. It's not a great mystery to me why Jackie Kennedy rushed to the arms of Aristotle Onassis. He was probably the one man in the world at that time who had enough power to protect her and her children.
Interesting.
And it's the old line about the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. She developed Go ahead.
Yeah, I want you to explain what you meant by you think she was killed, because that's kind of a new one for me. I didn't.
Well, she had breast cancer and was being treated, or she had Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as well. I forget whatever it was, but she was getting radiation, and they accidentally gave her something on the order of 10,000 times too much in one of her treatments. The machine was accidentally misset, and that hastened her death within months. I mean, it killed her.
Well, I'm sure they worried about her for a long time.
Well, they should.
What I do know is that upon her death, even the mainstream media reported that she had left behind either a manuscript or a pretty thick pile of notes in which she probably recounted her innermost thoughts about the state of the world and probably the assassination of her husband. And of course, but there was a stipulation that her accounts would not be made public until all of her children were deceased, which tells me that she, like Marina Oswald, was primarily concerned about the safety of her family and her children.
Right.
Probably with just cause. It's really amazing. And of course, I have to point out that when H. Ross Perot, back in 2000, was making a pretty solid run as a third-party candidate for the presidency and was gaining a groundswell of grassroots support, he suddenly dropped out of the race. And why? Well, he said because he feared for the safety of his family. Now, wait a minute. He was a presidential candidate, and as such, by law, was entitled to protection by the Secret Service, the FBI, the CIA, the U.S. military. So, who did he fear? And I would submit them.
Yeah.
So, who did he fear? And I would submit them.
Yeah. Well, you try and do some research now on the story about Jackie Kennedy's accidental massive radioactivity overdose, and she was getting radiation.
So I guess you
can't find it.
Add her name to the substantial list of witnesses whose unnatural deaths, certainly were convenient for anyone who did not want the truth of the assassination to come out.
I remember this very clearly, and I cannot find any reference to it anywhere. Some of you folks might be able to dig something up, but it was finally admitted that, whoops, the machine was set improperly.
Well, of course, when you start talking about cancer, so many of these witnesses died of cancer, and for the longest time, most people, including assassination researchers, did not really count them as strange or unnatural deaths, because after all, cancer is one of the leading causes of death. But there's a new book out now called Me and Lee, written by Judith Very Baker. And if you would permit me...
Did you say Ferry?
Very, V-A-R-Y.
Oh, okay. Right.
And if you will permit me, I could even give you an 800 number where you can call to order this book.
No, sure.
And everybody get a pencil and paper ready. I definitely would encourage everyone to read this book. It's just one heck of a story. She was a young cancer researcher, whiz kid, who was taken to New Orleans and was promised a scholarship to Tulane. And they said, but of course, first we want you to do a little work for us. And she was working very closely with David Ferry, a defrocked priest who figured very prominently in the Jim Garrison investigation, and then was found dead at his home with some typewritten notes, and they ruled it a suicide. But she, Judith Very Baker, goes very, very far in filling in the gaps and mysterious holes in Oswald's activities while he was in New Orleans there in the summer of 1963. And according to her, they began she was trying to find a cure for cancer, but she soon came to realize that what they were actually doing was developing an agent that would cause cancer, with the initial objective of slipping this into Cuba and one way or another injecting Fidel Castro, and then they would finally reach their goal of trying to take Castro out, which was, that's been well documented for many years that the CIA and others were trying their best to kill Castro. And this would have been perfect because then everybody would have said, oh, well, he died of cancer. And, nobody, including the Russians, would get too upset.
Isn't it amazing? I got a break here, but isn't it amazing how easily duped the sheep are? You just tell them something and they go right on eating.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't a missile coming out of the water near Los Angeles, even though it had a pointy object at the top and flames coming out the bottom.
Yeah, the nozzle was quite visible.
Yeah, but according to the Pentagon, that was just an optical illusion. It was just an aircraft contrail.
There have been about 10 different stories attempting to explain this away in different fashions, all of which don't wash. Be right back with Jim. Okay, and back with all of you good people and Jim Marrs. On this date, 1963, some and many say the last hope for America was extinguished. I would certainly go along with that.
While we're talking about assassination minutia, although it's not really minutia, these are actually very vital facts. I'd like to direct your attention to Oswald's weapon, okay, the 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano, a
piece of junk.
Italian war rifle that during World War II the Italians dubbed the humane weapon because it was notoriously inaccurate. Right. You couldn't kill anybody with it.
It was a junk.
But right there in the Warren Commission is the testimony of Ronald Simmons, who then was chief of the Weapons Evaluation Branch of the Ballistics Research Laboratory of the Department of the U.S. Army. And he tells them they could not sight the weapon in using the telescope. An attempt was made to sight it in using the iron sight. They had to adjust the sight with the addition of 2 metal shims. Okay? And then a page or so later, Commission Exhibits 576, 577, and 578, he corrected himself and said, well, actually, we had to put 3 metal shims under the telescopic sight to make it accurate enough to test. And they actually show us pictures of the little metal shims they had to put under the telescopic sight to make it accurate enough just to test. And we're told that he managed to squeeze off 3 shots in 6 seconds and hit 2 out of the 3 of the shots.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's absurd. It's not even, who do we know, or what's our best guess as to the person who did fire from somewhere behind in one of those buildings? Maybe it was the book depository on a lower floor. We don't know, but somebody shot from here.
My guess would be the Daltex building.
There you go.
Would be on the same trajectory as the line of sight as the book depository, but as you said, it was probably fired from a lower elevation.
Right.
And now, of course, supposedly Oswald killed Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit. Here's your question. What does the J.D. stand for?
I used to know that. I don't know. I've looked at a lot of pictures of him, though, and studied his life somewhat.
Well,
it was something ironic, and I'm sorry, I can't put my finger on it.
J.D. stood for Jefferson Davis.
That's it.
But anyway, and Oswald supposedly used his .38 special revolver in that shooting. However, I might point out that buried deep within the Warren Commission, there is a document showing that the FBI stated that this .38 pistol that he supposedly used to kill Officer Tippit had a bent firing pin, was inoperative, and they had to repair the pistol before before they could fire it. And of course, he was arrested less than 30 minutes after the shooting of Officer Tippit, and of course they obtained the pistol right then. So obviously, if they couldn't fire it when they had it in their custody, he couldn't have fired it 30 minutes earlier.
Question. The killing of J.D. Tippit has been postulated by some to have played a role in the coffin switch, the body switch, because apparently there was an uncanny resemblance between the two. I
understand that some of Tippit's friends used to jab him a little bit and say that he certainly looked like John F. Kennedy. Yeah, but we don't have enough time to go into the Tippit killing because there's all kinds of strange things there. But let me just say that Oswald, if he'd lived and been given a fair trial, would never have been convicted of killing Officer Tippit, because at that time there could have been produced at least 3 witnesses, including the assistant manager of the Texas Theater where he was captured and arrested, who said that he was already in the theater at the time the policeman was shot at 10th and Patton, many blocks away. So, you can't convict a guy if you got 3 witnesses that said, well, he wasn't at the scene of the crime, he was here in the theater. It's just, it's more smoke and mirrors. But you know what? See, they used the shooting of Tippit to great advantage, because once they said it was Oswald who had done the shooting of the police officer, then almost everyone in America said, well, he shot a cop down on a street down in South Dallas. He must have been getting away. And, why would he shoot the cop, if he hadn't shot the president? Well, now that we can absolutely prove that he did not kill the policeman, then we can now argue, well, then if he didn't shoot the policeman, maybe he didn't shoot the president.
It's a kind of a parallel there with Tim McVeigh a little bit, how conveniently he was apprehended, didn't put up any resistance, nothing like that.
Right.
Like they knew where he was going to be.
Well, they did know who he was. In fact, I can tell you that it was military intelligence who tipped off the Dallas police as to their suspect. And here's how I figure that. The Dallas police intelligence officer was Lieutenant Jack Revelle, and Jack Revelle had been at the Texas School Book Depository, and then by his own count, he had ridden back to police headquarters with a agent of the Office of Naval Intelligence. And of course, keep in mind, Oswald had been a Marine, and the Marines are under the Department of the Navy. Okay, so he gets back after riding with this naval intelligence officer, and the first thing he does is run up and type up a report of School Book Depository employees. And heading the list, the very first name was Harvey Lee Oswald of 605 Elsbeth. Well, Oswald had lived in an apartment on Elsbeth, but it was 602 Elsbeth. So they got the apartment number wrong, the address wrong. And, of course, as we all know, it was Lee Harvey Oswald, not Harvey Lee Oswald. And the Elsbeth address had not been used by Oswald on any of the paperwork there at the Texas School Book Depository. He had given his rooming house address on Beckley Street. So where in the world did Lieutenant Revelle get this Harvey Lee Oswald of 605 Elsbeth? Well, at the time of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, they interviewed a Colonel Jones of 4th Army Intelligence down at Fort Sam, Houston, and he testified that one of his agents called him from Dallas shortly after Oswald's arrest and told him that they had arrested a suspect, and his name was Alex James Hydell. And so Jones testified that he went to Army Intelligence, the file, and he did find an Alex James Hydell, and it cross-referenced to a Harvey Lee Oswald of 605 Elsbeth. So in other words, the military tipped off the Dallas police as to the identity of their suspect.
Well, there you go. Jim Marrs is the man. Okay, back in just a minute. Okay, talking with Jim on this 22nd of the 11th month, which again went by virtually unnoticed by the controlled media in this country.
Because they do not want the public to know the truth, apparently, about much of anything. But let me tell you the story of Robert West and Chester Brenneman, because this is very important. And the reason it's important is because recently, and I'm sure in the future, hide and watch, there'll be a lot of this on in 2013, the 50th anniversary of the assassination. There have been a spate of documentaries claiming that they have computer analysis clearly showing that Oswald could have done it all by himself. Well, here's the problem. On the Monday following the Friday, November 22nd, assassination of President Kennedy, Dallas County surveyor Robert West and his associate Chester Brenneman were in his office when the representatives of Time Life showed up and hired them to go and survey Dealey Plaza using individual frames from the famous Abraham Zapruder film, which they did. Then, a few months later, on late May of 1964, the Warren Commission hired Robert West and Chester Brenneman to again survey Dealey Plaza for them, which they did, and they did a very competent job. Chester Brenneman went on to become the county surveyor at Eastland County here in Texas, and I had the opportunity to meet with him and talk with him at some length, and he actually allowed me to copy their original plat map of Dealey Plaza. And on there, they noted that at the point in Elm Street where the first shots were received into the limousine, that the line of sight was obscured by a tree to the 6th floor of the School Book Depository.
That's right.
And they wrote that on their map. They also noticed a bullet mark on the curb on the south side of Elm Street, and they also noticed two strange yellow marks on the curb, about 10, 12 feet from each other, just short little bright yellow paint splotches, which doesn't make any sense, because if that was a curb that was to be painted yellow as a caution or as a no parking, you'd think they'd paint the whole curb, not just little two separate 2-foot lengths. And they noted all this on their map, and then they, of course, presented the elevations and distances and everything else based on the frames of the Zapruder film. Both men told me that the Warren Commission altered their surveyors' figures by changing the Zapruder film numbers. So what I'm telling you is that you cannot trust any computer simulation of the Kennedy assassination that is based on the distances, elevations, topography as presented by the Warren Commission, because they altered the figures. All right? Interesting. Now, both Brenneman and West also told me that, and here I'm quoting from Chester Brenneman, I wish to state that both investigations led us to believe beyond any doubt that there were two assassins. We felt that the Secret Service felt that way too. End quote. So they knew. They knew. The government knew. In fact, as further evidence of that, I would like to cite from the Warren Commission the transcripts of their hearings, and they stated that it was quite clearly, the chief counsel of the Warren Commission was J. Lee Rankin, and in a transcript of the Warren Commission meeting of January the 27th, 1964. Now, this is before they really started. This is when they were first organizing, and they were just hadn't even truly launched their investigation. And to background you on his statement, you have to understand that the Kennedy assassination and the lone assassin theory rest entirely on the very convoluted flight of one bullet, which they said passed through both President Kennedy and John Kennedy.
Here we are, the pristine bullet again.
The magic bullet, okay? And, of course, what they tried to tell us was, thanks to Gerald Ford, our unelected president, who at the last minute ordered the authors of the Warren Commission report to change the wording from Kennedy was shot in the back to Kennedy was shot through the neck. Well, Kennedy was never shot through the neck. He was shot in the back at the level of the third thoracic vertebra to the right of the backbone. So let's go back to the transcript of the Warren Commission meeting of January 27, 1964, and we hear their chief counsel, J. Lee Rankin, say, quote, "Well, it seems quite apparent now, since we have a picture of where the bullet entered in the back, that the bullet entered below the shoulder blade to the right of the backbone, which is below the place where the picture shows the bullet came out in the neck band of the shirt in front. And that bullet, according to the autopsy, didn't strike any bone at all, that particular bullet. So that how it could turn, and then he stops. And that's the end of that. They go on to something else. So, of course, what he got to was the point was, so if it entered in his back, how could it turn and go upward and then turn again and go downward to strike Conley? So they knew. They knew, even before they started their own investigation, that the single bullet theory couldn't work, and therefore there had to be at least two assassins.
Right.
And so what did they do? They lied to us. They just lied to us.
They're still at it.
And they're still at it.
How many witnesses who saw a missile or missiles go up and take down TWA Flight 800?
Mm-hmm.
And weren't called? Over 600.
Yep, exactly.
NTSB
I don't know,
didn't call.
When are we as a people going to finally get fed up with the lies, the distortions, everything else? Are we just a nation of zombies?
I think that we are.
Do we just wander around and go wherever somebody leads us?
And the younger generation is more zombified than the generation above it. And you know what the communists always said? Just give us the children, forget the old ones.
Yeah, that's true.
We'll do it. I don't see it, unfortunately.
Well, I'm always asked, will we ever know the truth? And I try to tell whoever asks me that, you're not asking the right question.
Correct.
Because if you'll actually study the facts which are now available in the assassination of President Kennedy, unfortunately, it requires a little reading and thinking, because you probably have to go through half dozen or a dozen books to get all this information. But if you actually would study this information, you'll know the truth. You'll know what happened to President Kennedy. So the question they're actually trying to ask is, will the government ever fess up? Will some official ever get up at a news conference and say, okay, folks, here's what really happened.
Just like they fessed up over the murder of Abraham Lincoln and all that. They always fess up.
And, of course, the answer to that question is no. They're not going to do that. Nobody has the intestinal fortitude to stand up and tell the truth, especially after so much time has gone by. So, no, that ain't going to happen. But as far as can we know the truth, yes, we know the truth. I know the truth. You know the truth. And chances are most of your listeners know the truth.
Correct.
But so what? Who's going to do anything about it? But I would admonish anyone listening who is, say, below the age of 40, do a little research, study on your own, and pass the word so that we can start dealing with the problems in this country from a standpoint of truth rather than a pack of lies.
Well, it's a tractor trailer full of lies. It just goes endless.
Boatload.
One after another after another. No, they don't have any respect for the public. It's just like lying about UFO, ETs, and all that. I mean,
well, it's like, again, going back to the transcripts of the Warren Commission meetings, at one point, one of the commissioners said, I don't know about this. You think we need to be putting this down on the record? And Alan Dulles, who had been fired as the longest-serving director of the CIA by John F. Kennedy, and who was then sitting there to determine what happened to him, which in my mind is akin to putting the fox in charge of the hen house, said, oh, nobody's going to read. He said, years from now there'll be some college professors, some academics, they might pour through this, but nobody's going to read this stuff. Nobody's going to pay attention. And he was right, and he's wrong. It's interesting because he was wrong because today there is still an intense interest in the public over what really happened to President Kennedy, and even some of the younger generations are actually beginning to look into it, and they have access to information that is just unparalleled in the history of the world. Alan Dulles, I don't think, could, in his wildest dreams in 1964, have thought that before 50 years were up, that every little school kid, junior high, elementary school kids, would have access to a computer, and they would have access to the Warren Commission records. They would have access to the photographs, the films, and they could move them around, blow them up, enlarge them, do all this work. It's incredible.
Right.
So he was wrong about that. Some people are paying attention and are studying it, but then he was also right in that the majority of the younger generations, while they do have access to this information, they're not making use of it. They're all on Twitter or MyFace or whatever it is, and their social networks, and they're talking about who's doing what to who and blah, blah, blah. So in a way, he's right. Here we are in the future, and nobody really is paying much attention. And, of course, the major controlled mass corporate media keeps just, drumming out the propaganda. And what that leads to is the cover-up in the Kennedy assassination, which is not a cover-up in the classic sense of the word, meaning that there's a lack of evidence. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There is such a plethora, I like that word, of evidence that it is cover-up by obfuscation. There is so much stuff to pour through, so many books, so many documents, and charge and countercharge, claim and counterclaim, that the average guy and gal just goes, oh, man, this is making my head hurt. I'm not going to look at this anymore.
Right. Okay, my friend, thank you very much for that excellent overview and summary of where we are 47 years later after the murder of John Kennedy. Thank you, James. Take care. Talk soon.
All right. Adios, my friend.
Good night. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, and we're back, going down to Texas to talk to the man from Mars himself, Gentleman James. Are you there?
I is here.
How are you?
And today is an auspicious day.
I'm looking on the CNN homepage right now, and nearly 30 stories, and there's not one mention of it.
Oh, of course not. Never mind the one event that took place in this nation's history that has brought us to this strange and downtrodden condition that we're in today.
Make it 50 stories, and you're totally right. We are here today because of what happened 48 years ago.
On this day.
On this day.
Yep. And if there's anybody listening who doesn't know what that was, then you need to do some reading.
Shame on you.
Shame on you.
Yeah.
Today, 48 years ago
48,
today, was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And I'll just say right off the bat a couple of things. Number one, don't trust anything I say, okay? Don't believe me. Hey, I'm just an old Texas reporter, but I've been at it for a long time. In fact, I was already in the journalism business in 1963. And in fact, I met Jack Ruby and was in his club about a month before the assassination.
Unreal.
And I know what was going on in Dallas, and I know who ran Dallas, and I know what criminal elements were in Dallas, okay? I didn't run with them, but I knew about it, okay? And you just have to, so don't believe anything I say, but now you listen to me, and then you go check it out, and you'll find out I'm telling you the truth. And now, on to journalism Kennedy Assassination 101, either it was the act of one lone nut, the ex-Marine Lee Harvey Oswald, as the government has pronounced.
I admire you for even being able to say that, but go ahead.
Yeah, or there was somebody else involved. Okay, somebody helped him get away. Somebody got him in the theater. Somebody gave him some money. Somebody egged him on. Somebody helped him shoot. Somebody was firing from the infamous grassy knoll. Somebody. Okay. Well, even the last official word of the United States government was that, according to two separate sets of acoustical scientists and backed by other evidence, they concluded that there was at least one shot from the grassy knoll. Well, he can't be in two places at once, so that means there was a second shooter.
There's no question.
Okay? And therefore they said there was probably a conspiracy. But they said, we're out of money, we're out of time.
Let's get this thing put to sleep. Come on.
So we don't know who that was, and he probably missed. So it was still Lee Harvey Oswald with 3 shots from the School Book Depository. Here's one I bet you don't even know, Jeff. The Warren Commission itself hired a committee of ballistics experts. And I forget now, there's 6 or 8 of them. And they all unanimously concluded that it was physically impossible for the shots to have been fired and made the effects that the government said it did. So what did the Warren Commission do?
Well, they
kept that classified for about 15 years. Nobody even saw that. And Arlen Specter, who was a young attorney at that time on the Warren Commission, said, well, I don't care what they say. My opinion is that a bullet went in his back and it came out his neck and then somehow went down, hit Connolly, caused all his wounds, and that was it. And that way, that allowed for one missed shot, and that allowed for then a shot to the head.
Also
and it was 3 shots with Lee Harvey Oswald from the School Book Depository. Yeah, that's what they have expected you to believe.
And some still do, tragically.
Because of appeal to authority.
Yeah.
You get somebody like Gerald Posner, a Wall Street attorney, and a man who's written very close personal accounts of Nazi war criminals. Now, gee, I wonder how he got to those. And he wrote a book called Case Closed, and it went all over the place. And even though he told me himself, he admitted that the case is not closed. And he said, okay, here we go. Oswald did it all by himself. Well, of course, today, Posner has now been fired and as being revealed as being a plagiarist and someone who has made up and altered quotes, okay? So I guess we can't really trust him. So I guess we're going to have to trust Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote a more than 1,000-page book that in one section has a made-up dialogue between a fictionary mafioso guy that he names Vinny, who's talking to Jack Ruby, and he says, hey, Ruby, you got to whack Oswald. You know? Oh, geez, it's like a bad Sopranos script. Mm-hmm. And this is who we're supposed to believe, you know, but it's an appeal to authority because, he sold our books. He was a prosecutor, and, you know, that's who you're supposed to believe. So don't believe me, and certainly don't believe them. Check it out for yourself, and here's what you're going to find out, okay? The single bullet theory does not work, okay? And even the government's own last official theory is that there was a conspiracy. All right. Oh, now, wait a minute. So did Oswald even fire a shot? Well, according to the Dallas police paraffin test, right after he arrived at police headquarters, they put paraffin on his hands, paraffin on his face to test for gunpowder and nitrates.
Whoops.
They found traces of nitrates on his hand, which is basically meaningless because, by all accounts, he was spent that morning moving around boxes of school books which had printing ink all over them, and printing ink would give you nitrates. But there was no gunpowder on his hand. And, interestingly enough, no gunpowder or nitrates on his cheek. Well, now, the only way you're going to fire a bolt-action rifle, 3 shots in 6 seconds, which the FBI said it takes 2 seconds just to cock the bolt, pull the trigger, never mind trying to aim, is to hold it up close to your shoulder, sight down the sight, just like you see people doing with a rifle, and then pull the bolt back as you fire. Well, if he had done that, his right cheek would have been just perforated with nitrates and gunpowder.
Blown right into the pores. No way to hide it.
No way to hide it.
You can't even wash it out easily.
But wait a minute. If he didn't fire that rifle, then where was he? Well, if you can believe this, even though he was held in captivity for 2.5 days by the Dallas police, they said that they kept no notes of what he said. He was interrogated several times, but they kept no notes, and they had no tape recording, made no tape recording. So in other words, we don't really know what he said. All we know is what the authorities told us he said. All right? But they asked him, Captain Fritz, and this is in Appendix 11 of the Warren Commission report. Captain Fritz, who headed the homicide investigation in Dallas, said, "Where were you at the time of the shooting?" He said, "I was in the downstairs lunchroom of the school book depository." He said, "Was there anybody else in there with you?" He said, "Yeah. There was 2 colored boys," what they called them in those days. And he said one of them, his name is Junior, and he said the other's a short, stocky guy, and I'm not sure his name. Well, Harold Norman was short and stocky, and Junior Jarman was with him, and they ate their lunch in the downstairs lunchroom until minutes before the motorcade arrived, and then ran up to the 5th floor on the elevator, left the doors open on the elevator so it wouldn't work. Nobody else could use the elevator. So my question is, if there had ever been a trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, how could he have accurately described the 2 guys in the downstairs lunchroom if he was up on the 6th floor preparing to shoot at the president? But he didn't get a trial, did he? No, what he got was the cover of Life magazine in January before the Warren Commission ever began their investigation, and it had a picture of him, supposedly of him, in the backyard holding a rifle and holding a communist newspaper. And the caption on the cover, which went all over the country, said, "Lee Harvey Oswald with the weapons he used to kill President Kennedy and Officer Tippit."
Went right in.
How's that
stayed.
for guilty until proven innocent?
Yep.
And the Warren Commission held secret testimony.
But that cover right then and there, James, became part of history. I mean, that solidified in the people's minds and the subconscious what happened.
Okay, here's another way they solidified it. There was a lot of question. In fact, here in Texas, I heard more than several people say the day of the assassination, Lyndon Johnson's behind this, because they knew what kind of murderous SOB he was, okay? And they knew it, and it all just made sense. He was the one guy who profited most from the assassination.
Well, what did he say to his mistress, allegedly?
Yes, well, he told Madeline Brown, and she told me that the night before, he told her that after tomorrow, those G.D. Kennedys will never bother me again. Oops, sounds like foreknowledge to me. It's amazing, but the devil's in the details. The devil's in the details.
Going to go right through the break, Network. Thank you. Go ahead, Jane.
Are we going?
No, we're going through the break. Go right ahead.
Okay. The devil's in the details. See, because you can cover up a lot of stuff, but you can't cover up every little thing. So, somebody sneaked in the Texas theater. Well, Kennedy was shot at 12:30. About an hour later, in 1:30, somebody sneaked in the Texas theater out south of Oak Cliff, and the manager asked the ticket salesman, "Did you sell somebody tickets?" She said, "No." So he said, "Call the police." So she called the police, told them somebody sneaked in the theater. Well, they've got the president killed. They've got their own police officer killed, and they rushed 15 squad cars, FBI, district attorneys, and even men claiming to be from the CIA out to the Texas theater. And about 1:45 or 50, they haul out Lee Harvey Oswald, and kill the president, will you? Some of them are shouting, and some of the law enforcement people. And so they hustle him into a squad car, and so it takes probably about 15, 20 minutes to get downtown. Got to park, got to get him in the police station. So about 2:20, 2:30, he's just arrived at the police station 2 hours after the shooting. He's got 2 sets of identification on him. One shows he's Lee Harvey Oswald, and a selective service card shows he's Alex James Heidel. And the police are saying, "Which one are you?" He said, "You're the cops. You figure it out." He's being uncooperative. At that time, according to FBI documents released in 1977, J. Edgar Hoover is on the phone to Robert Kennedy saying, we have our man in Dallas, he's Lee Harvey Oswald, he's an ex-Marine, he defected to Russia, he's a mean-spirited individual in the category of a nut. So they already had him tagged. They knew who he was, his background, and at a time when the Dallas authorities weren't even sure of the identity of the man they had in custody.
Right.
Now, to back that up, let me tell you a story I just heard today, Jeff. I'm at the grassy knoll for the ceremonies, and this fellow came up to me, and he said that in 1963, he was a high school student at Arlington Heights High School over in Fort Worth, which is the high school that Lee Harvey Oswald attended briefly, okay? He said on the day of the assassination, the principal came on the loudspeaker and said the president has been killed, and everybody, of course, was in a state of shock. Everybody was just kind of wandering around. So about 2 o'clock, they called off school. They announced, okay, that's it. Now, everybody go home. So he was getting ready to leave school at just a few minutes after 2 o'clock. Okay, this is an hour and a half after the shooting. And he sees what he called cops, because they were in dark suits, dark ties, hats, looked like detectives in the school office. And he thought that was a little bit odd. So he goes on home. The weekend passes. Monday, they called off school again because all schools were called off. That was the day of the funeral. And then on Tuesday, when he got back to Arlington Heights, he met the school secretary out in the hall, who he happened to know personally, And he asked her, he said, what were those cops doing in the school? There about 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. And she acted kind of apprehensive, looked around, make sure nobody was over here, and she said, can you keep a secret? And he said, yes. She said, those were men from the FBI, and they were here after Oswald's school records. So the FBI is at his high school, getting his school records a little after 2 o'clock, when he probably hadn't even arrived at the police station, where he had 2 sets of identification, and nobody in Dallas even knew who he was. Hello?
Unreal.
And it does. And it just goes on and on and on.
You know so much about this, Jim. No one on the planet knows more about this whole thing than you. It's just amazing to listen to you talk. It's all in your head. It's all there.
And today I met with Beverly Oliver, who was in Dealey Plaza taking a film of the assassination from the south side of Elm Street. And as she would pan along, and as she panned up along the motorcade, guess what would have been in the background of her film? The grassy knoll and the school book depository. It would have been an invaluable piece of evidence.
And
so what happened to it? Well, she worked for Abe's Colony Club as a singer, which was right across this empty parking lot from Jack Ruby's Carousel Club. And she was in both of these clubs all the time, just hobnobbing with the actors and the MC and the comedians and the dancers and whoever. And she said the Monday after the assassination, when she showed up for work, there was a man waiting on her who said he was with the FBI and said they needed her film to use as evidence, and they would make a copy of it and get it back to her. And she said, of course, you're not going to say no to the FBI. Plus, at that point, everybody wanted to be a good patriotic citizen. So she handed over her film, and needless to say, we've never seen it again, and the FBI claims they never took it. Okay? Now, this is the same Beverly Oliver who, on several occasions, met Lee Harvey Oswald in Jack Ruby's club. And in fact, on one occasion, he was sitting at the table with Jack Ruby, and when she came up, Jack Ruby said, Beverly, I want to introduce you to Lee Oswald with the CIA.
Wow.
As though, now, is that a one deal? Maybe she was lying. Okay, maybe she's just making up a story. But the problem is that is supported by at least 15 or 18 other people that I could name and rattle off who also saw Lee Harvey Oswald and Ruby together prior to the assassination.
Right.
So, I mean, we have never been told the truth about that, and yet the one thing historians all agree on, you'd agree, I agree, is that our country's gone downhill ever since the Kennedy assassination. And why is that? Was it simply because of the fact that Jack Kennedy was killed? Maybe, but I think it's deeper than that. When we have something that traumatic happen and then we're lied to, it's like when you find out there's no such thing as Santa Claus. Okay?
Oh, absolutely.
The whole country lost its innocence,
sure.
and we all became pawns of people who want to try to run the world and run us.
It's hard for me to imagine one country receiving and absorbing a more profoundly painful, agonizing jolt in one event than that one event. That rocked this country to its molecules.
Right, and that would have been bad enough if it had just been the event. But then, when all this stuff dribbles out over weeks, months, and stuff, and of course everyone desperately wanted to believe the Warren Commission, except of course I guarantee you, people here in Dallas knew different. All right? Tell you another great story. Jean Hill was one of the critical witnesses to the assassination, and she was savaged by the FBI and by the Warren Commission. They took her to a small windowless room in Parkland Hospital and told her if she didn't change her testimony and talking about a guy shooting from the grassy knoll, that they would declare her as crazy as Marguerite Oswald and see that she was institutionalized.
Wow.
That's your government tax dollars in action. But
you have talked to so many people.
But she went on to become a school teacher in South Dallas, which is a predominantly black area. And she passed away a few years ago, but sometime, I think probably back in the early 90s, mid-90s, she invited me to come over to Dallas to talk to her school. And I said, okay. So I went over there, and they'd gotten 3 or 4 elementary classes together in the school library, and I looked out over this sea of young, smiling black faces, okay, and I'm going, I better, keep my remarks pretty simple because these are young kids. They weren't even born. In fact, they weren't even born for 20 years after the assassination.
Right. Sure. Yeah, all right.
So I said, hi, kids. I said, we all know that President Kennedy was killed here in Dallas, and there's this big chorus of, yes. And I said, and we all know that they tell us he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. No.
Wow.
It's amazing, Jeff.
Wow.
I mean, the roar, no. And why would these kids who weren't even born there and were too young to have studied the assassination all say no so emphatically? And I'll tell you why. Because in 1963, black people in Dallas just didn't count, okay? They still had colored and white restrooms and drinking fountains. And in Dealey Plaza, where there were several hundred people, I would venture to say perhaps as much as a third of the people in Dealey Plaza were black citizens. And none of them were ever asked to testify or even questioned by the authorities because at that time, the authorities acted like they didn't exist. But they did, and they were there. And I think that their parents and their grandparents went home, and when these kids were little, they told them what they knew happened in Dealey Plaza, and it didn't work out to Lee Harvey Oswald using 3 shots from the school book depository. Is that amazing?
Huh.
People know. It's just like the poll they did in New York City.
Yeah. Well, the same thing about 9/11.
51% said no, and 9/11 was an inside job.
Yeah,
they know.
In 5-10 years from now, it'll be 80%, 90% no.
Yeah, exactly. But right now, we're not supposed to talk about it.
No.
In fact, it was censored. Everything I had to say about 9/11 was censored out of my last book.
Still?
Yep.
I remember you talking to me quietly about this, and you were not happy with it, but I didn't know they took it all out.
No. They basically, I skeeked one thing through, and it was a heavyweight thing, so I said, well, I guess I'll be happy.
The lid is still down, folks.
Lid's still down, and folks, let me tell you something. It's the same thing all over again. It's deja vu all over again.
Yeah, I hear you.
About 15 years after the Kennedy assassination, it was considered impolite to talk about it in decent company.
Isn't that the truth?
You just don't bring it up. We don't want to discuss that.
Nope.
And we're going through a same period right now on 9/11.
You got a good point.
The evidence for 9/11 being a government
enormous,
conspiracy,
bigger than Kennedy's. Bigger.
It is so blatant, so in your face, so demonstrable that it makes the Kennedy assassination truly look like a deep, dark mystery, which it's not.
Correct. Absolutely. All right, hold on, Jim. We'll be right back. The incredible words and descriptions of Jim Marrs about 48 years ago today We'll continue after this. Okay, back with Jim. Just a remarkable first half hour, an overview of just a few of the tiny, enormous pieces of the puzzle. Tiny because no one pays attention to them, nobody knows. But
nobody knows, nobody cares about them.
Right. They don't, but they're huge. They're huge pieces. And the Warren Commission, of course, the greatest lie, next to the 9/11 report, I guess. Well, the two of them, brother and sister. Just horrible. You're right. I think
there's others.
Yeah, there are. TWA Flight 800.
Let me tell you how the Warren Commission acted. Okay, first off, let's talk about Phil Willis. Phil Willis was, and his family was there on the south side of Elm Street on the Dealey Plaza, and he was taking pictures. Okay, and one of the last pictures he got was a picture of Jack Ruby standing right near the front of the school book depository, even though he's supposed to be 2 blocks away at the Dallas Morning News, but he could have slipped out for 5 or 10 minutes, gone right back, right? And Phil Willis knew Jack Ruby, and he said, "Yep, that's him." And Phil Willis was a man to be reckoned with. He was a veteran. He was a major. He retired from the Army as a major, and he was the first American to capture a Japanese in World War II. Because as a young soldier, he had been placed on guard duty at the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, and there was a 2-man Japanese submarine that got hit, and the 2 crewmen got out and tried to swim to shore, and one of them didn't make it. The other one did, crawled up on the shore, and
he captured
took him prisoner.
I'll be damned.
Became the first American to capture a Japanese prisoner in World War II. Great guy. And I asked him about his treatment at the hands of the Warren Commission, and here's what he said, quote, "Oh, hell, I'd tell them yes, and they'd put down no." Okay?
Wow.
Now, let me tell you about the Hartmans, Edna and Wayne Hartman. They heard shooting. They ran into Dealey Plaza, and they ran down near the manhole cover on the south side of Elm Street. And they saw what they thought might have been molehills, but people said, no, that's where bullets hit. So they got to looking at it, and there were gouges in the dirt there. And they looked, and it lined up right across the street towards the picket fence on the grassy knoll. So later, they went to the FBI and said, well, you know, we were there, we saw a lot, and the FBI didn't actually seem to be too interested in what they had to say. But they went ahead and made up their report. And in the late 1980s, as I was finishing up my book, Crossfire, I just had a wild hair, and I picked up the Dallas phone book, and there was Wayne Hartman. And I called up, I talked to his wife first, Edna, and I said, "Are you the Hartmans that were in Dealey Plaza?" "Yes, we certainly were." I said, "Well, let me read you this FBI report and see if this jives with your memory." So I told how they'd said they ran down the plaza and they were looking around and they saw these marks and everything was going great until I read the FBI report that said the Hartman said this gouged out hole was in line with the general area of the Texas School Book Depository building. And she said, "What?" I said, "Well, that's what it says here in the report as published by the Warren Commission." And she said, "Well, that's not what we told them at all. We told them it lined up with a grassy knoll." So there you go, folks. Will the government lie to you? Only consistently.
And forever.
And forever. It's time to clean house in Washington, D.C., and get the criminals and the scumbags and the liars and the corrupt people out of there. And we need to get this country back on an even keel and start operating in a decent manner.
We got to have a big vacuuming of Washington, D.C., friend.
Yep.
Big.
By the way, all this Occupy stuff, they're occupying Dallas. I was there over the weekend for a conference, and all a huge ton of people going down the street, police escorts, you know, the whole thing, and of course California and New York. But wait a minute, is anybody occupying Washington? That's where we all ought to go. There ought to be about 5 million Americans march on Washington, just go from office to
Federal
office.
Reserve.
Hey, you've been downsized. Go get a real job.
Federal Reserve and D.C. You're right.
Yeah. That's where there you go. You know, it's really amazing. But see, hardly anybody knows what's going on because they're still getting a paycheck. TV still works. Beer's still cold. You know, and so hey, let's just settle back. Maybe things will get better.
This all goes back to...
Nothing's going to get better, Jeff, until we start acting from a point of truth.
We got to look at who's...
And we need to start with the Kennedy assassination. We need to move right on up through Oklahoma City and through the Waco disaster where they just killed all those people at their church.
They just absolutely...
And then right on up to 9/11, and we need to say, that's enough.
All right, the big thread here was 1913, the Federal Reserve Act. That thread became a rope. That rope became a garrote. And it's strangling this country right now. It's tied right into the hands of the controllers in the City of London banking cartel. That's where it all goes. Those people own their own country with their own thermonuclear arsenal, which they have been using to blackmail people for decades. It's in a U.S. Army paper. I've got it. It's a white paper. It's up on Rense. That brings me back to the beginnings again of what caused John Kennedy to have to check out early. And one of the things that he was fiercely and ferociously against was the idea that Israel was going to go nuclear. He knew it, his staff knew it, and he told Ben-Gurion it isn't going to happen. He demanded inspections of Dimona. He knew what was going on, that plutonium was being stolen or was about to be stolen. He knew. They had good intelligence then.
Yep.
And I'm telling you right now, you do not do that with people as cold-blooded as those people are, and they are. And
we're not talking about Jewish people, are we?
No, hell no.
Hell
please.
No.
We're talking about Zionists, world Zionism.
Zionists who are tightly connected to
They're absolutely
banks.
Secular, they're apolitical, secular, greed-mongering monsters whose goal is to control everything. There's no limit to their greed. They hide behind Judaism. There's nothing to do with being Jewish. Nothing.
That's right.
Nothing.
Absolutely right. In fact, I'm probably one of the last people to remember the Karen Silkwood case. Okay.
Oh, I do.
McGee plant up there on the
for sure
border of Oklahoma and Texas, and as long as she was content to speak out about labor reform, they didn't like that, but they could put up with that. But then when she started talking about the missing plutonium, oops, she had a one-car accident.
And where did it go, folks? Tons and tons of it missing. That's right. Yeah, they've got 400 or 500 nuclear
folks,
warheads.
This is not conjecture. This is fully known. When I was in Israel, they said, "Yep, we got it." You know?
Mordecai Vanunu, 18 years in solitary confinement for saying the obvious that the Israelis had the bomb. When he got out, when he got out, he's back in now. You know why?
Because he said it again.
He said it again, and he said they have been using the bomb to blackmail governments around the world for decades. He confirmed what the U.S. Air Force papers said.
And yet, here we are, we're about to go to war with Iran because they said that we're told they're thinking about maybe making one bomb.
God, I can't even laugh at it.
It's insane, folks. Wake up.
Yeah, hold on. We'll be right back with Jim Marrs. It is beyond insane. Okay, back with Jim Marrs, talking about 48 years ago today. And what happened on this day, 48 years ago, is exactly why we are here now. I think, personally, it is impossible to overestimate the impact of Zionism on this planet. It is literally in control of much of the Western world through finances. You remember what was said by Baron Rothschild, 200 years ago? I don't care about politics, just give me the control of the country's money, and that's it. And that's why right now, as I've said, the central bank system, the Rothschild central bank system, literally is in all but 3 countries on the planet. It controls all but 3 countries in the world: Cuba, North Korea, and Iran. Every other country has a central bank. The one here is called the Federal Reserve, but it's still a Rothschild bank. This is one family and one cartel with that much power. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's astonishing. They went ahead and hurried the war so they could install Israel. They didn't have to wait for God to do it. So they put it in there, turned it on, and began arming it.
Well, I always say that we operate under the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rule.
Yeah, well, right now there's a life and death fight on to acquire as much physical gold as can possibly be acquired, because the new world currency, whatever it's going to be called, will probably be backed by alleged gold reserves. So there is a war on for gold right now, and the people fighting the biggest, most vigorous battles for it are this very cartel. They want the gold. And that's why when Hugo Chavez demanded his gold, everything came to a halt. It took him a lot of work to get his gold. It was several hundred tons, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a real ugly
that
situation.
leads us into all kinds of things. But before we go, I've got to explain one other thing, if I may.
Please.
Okay. Up till now, we've had several TV programs and documentaries that purport to show us computer simulations proving that Oswald certainly could have done all this shooting just all by himself.
Well, Peter Jennings, much to his disgrace, in his last major ABC News special, pushed that crap, and I you know.
Oh, they've had several like that. But now, let me explain this to you. Listen, folks, you cannot trust any computer simulation. It's this simple. A computer is only as good as the information you put into it. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Okay. Years ago, I personally interviewed Bob West, who was the county surveyor for Dallas County, and his associate, Chester Brenneman, who went on to become the official county surveyor in Eastland County in West Texas. Okay, these were the two men who were hired on Monday following the Friday assassination to survey Dealey Plaza for Life magazine. And they said that at that point, everybody agreed that one man could not have done the shooting. Later in the spring of 1964, these two men were the same fellows hired by the Warren Commission to do survey work in Dealey Plaza to determine the lengths, distances, elevations, etc. Okay, now to have a accurate and truthful computer simulation, you must have accurate and truthful information put in. And yet both of these men told me the Warren Commission altered their numbers. Okay? So any computer simulation undoubtedly is based on the Warren Commission survey distances, elevations, etc., and they were falsified and altered. Okay? So you cannot, and I know of no other survey work that's ever been done in Dealey Plaza. So all these computer simulations are based on the Warren Commission's figures, which were changed from the truthful figures. So do not trust a computer simulation. I'm a computer phobe. I have a love-hate relationship with computers.
Yeah.
Because they work great till you really need them.
Yeah, that's the truth.
But I could get on a computer and I could jimmy numbers and figures and data enough to prove to you that Oswald did it all by himself, or prove to you that there were 40 assassins. Okay? So do not trust any of that stuff. They have lied to us over and over and over. And if somebody comes and tells you that Oswald did it all by themselves, you're facing a person who is one of two things. They either have not done their homework, or they are an enemy of the American people.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Yep.
It's really just amazing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. There's so much I could tell you, but it's just there. And I've lived through it. I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
I felt it. Okay? When I was in the home of Marguerite Oswald, and when I was in the home of John DeMornshield, the last close friends of Lee Harvey Oswald and George DeMornshield.
He was, George was killed.
Yes, yes. He died of a shotgun blast to his head. They ruled it a suicide, but his wife told me, I could accept the fact that George committed suicide, but I guarantee you he hated and detested guns. He never would have done it with a gun. But
George knew too much.
On and on.
There's
like more than 100 people connected to the Kennedy assassination, one way or another, that died under, shall we say, unnatural circumstances. The one I love was a biker by the name of Whirl who told the FBI and the Dallas police he saw men running from the rear of the school book depository moments after the shooting. What happened to him? Well, they found him on the outskirts of Dallas, lying in the roadway with his bicycle standing beside him on its kickstand, and they said it was, and his neck was broken, and they said it was a one vehicle accident.
Yeah.
He tumped off his motorcycle and broke his neck.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. He tumped off his motorcycle, breaking his neck, and then got up and put it up on the kickstand.
Up. No, I was very
very
considerate. He really liked that bike.
He really liked that bike. It's just that ridiculous. The number 3 man in the FBI was called to testify to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. But before he could testify, he was out in his backyard when he was shot by the son of a New Hampshire state patrolman, and the son of the patrolman said, "Well, I mistook him for a deer," and the local sheriff said, "Well, I knew the kid and I knew the FBI guy," and said, I just recused myself from this case. And so they turned it over to the local game warden, who filled out a form, and when it said victim, animal, or human, he checked human, and that was about the end of that investigation.
Mm-hmm.
William C. Sullivan. What a deal. Come on, folks, wake up.
I'm worried that in another generation or two, much of this knowledge it won't be lost, but it'll be lost to easy access by people who no longer think. It'll be in books. It'll be there. But who cares? Right. They know.
Yeah, and my latest gripe, believe it or not, is against what used to be one of my favorite authors, Stephen King, who now has a new book out.
Yeah, what's that all about?
Yeah, I can tell you in a nutshell here.
I mean, I don't want the story, but what's he doing?
No. What I tell you is that I'm not going to tell you the whole story. And actually, the first part of it, where the guy goes back in time and he's talking about life in the late 50s and early 60s, it's kind of cool, especially for somebody to live through all that, because you go, whoa, I was going, wow, I remember that. Oh, yeah, I did that. Okay. But then I'm not even going to bore you with the story, but the bottom line is that the guy went back and tried to stop Oswald from shooting from the window. Okay? And at first he succeeds, and Kennedy is spared, and then the country goes to hell. We get into wars, and we have financial disasters and geological disasters, and there's papers blowing in the streets, and none of which, I don't know of anybody who's actually studied all this who believes that would have happened if Kennedy lived. So anyway, he has to go back in time and make sure that Oswald kills Kennedy, okay, so that we can have our wonderful present, such as it is. Now, the clincher is, in the back, he gives full credit to Gerald Posner as his main source of information, among a couple other books. A guy who is a known plagiarist, a known liar, and somebody who alters quotes, and a man who told me to my face that he didn't even want to write his book on the Kennedy assassination, but he was talked into it by a man who promised him the full cooperation of the CIA. So we know where that's coming from. And then, who is the other person that he names as his number one source? Gary Mack, the curator of the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas, which has steadfastly refused to carry any books that offer any alternative explanation of anything, except Oswald did it by himself.
Right.
Jeez, give me a break.
Still rankles one to even think about this.
And the thing is, hide and watch. I was talking at the convention over the weekend, and they were saying, it's about time for another major movie like Oliver Stone's, to address the Kennedy assassination. And I suddenly got cold chills, because I know it'll be Stephen King's book, and we'll see Oswald crouching in the window, and we'll all be rooting. Hopefully we can stop him, blah, blah, blah. And all that does is just imprint that phony story in people's minds.
I'm surprised at King. I really am.
Well, he didn't do his homework, or he didn't go to the right people. I'll tell you that.
I just, that's hard to believe. He's not a stupid man, and that's a stupid thing he did. You got to think maybe there's more to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That'd be my guess.
Maybe he owes IRS money. I don't know.
Maybe they cut him a deal, for sure. Jim, thank you. That was a great hour. Just fascinating.
Well, don't believe me, folks, but read, study, and use your own head, and you can figure out what happened, okay?
We know what happened. Thank you, my friend. Great to talk to you.
Later.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. Bye.
Okay, good night. Gentleman Jim Marrs. All right, that's our program tonight. 3 fascinating hours. And we'll be back tomorrow night in 21 hours and talk to you then.